Hello everyone, welcome to the Varanus podcast on the Trap Talk Reptile Network. Today I'm joined by two special guests, Luke Harding and Steve Dickey from Singapore Zoo. Thank you very much for joining us, guys.
Hey, nice to be here. Thanks for being here too.
Glad you brought the English weather with you both, or the Scottish weather with you both. So just a heads up, everyone, we're having a pretty bad storm at the moment, so we might just lose you completely. If we do that, then we'll reorganise the podcast for a different day. But for people that don't know, Luke and Steve, how did you get into working with the zoo, and especially Singapore Zoo?
Just process, go on.
Yeah, I suppose obviously I've been interested in animals all my life. I've kept lots of exotics along the way. I've been in the UK zoo industry for the past 27 years, and then there was an opportunity that's come up at Singapore Zoo fairly recently, so I decided to join the team there as assistant curator of herpetology.
Perfect.
Yeah, my story is along the same lines, I guess. So had quite an animal-orientated childhood, family into all that. And then probably the same route as most people listening or into reptiles, that the private sector took hold. It became a hobby first. I was really fortunate to be surrounded by good private keepers, great shopkeepers, people that opened up the diversity of taxa and just how complicated the science of keeping these animals is. And then lucky enough then to turn that hobby into a job. Started in Chester Zoo, and then a mixture between zoos and the field gave me an opportunity to try to, do that, which is great. It's opened up a lot of doors, but it does change the aspect of keeping. It turns it away from maybe being as fun when it becomes that in an essence, but in another way adds another branch to it that was new to me. So yeah, kind of that route in, really, the typical had a snake, had a animal at home, and then got inspired really to see if I could get paid to do that, because that'd be really fun.
Yeah, of course. Moving to a different country, as you've both done, and I've done myself now, is a big move. You've done it quite recently, Steve. How have you found it so far?
Yeah, so again, it's a big change, obviously a big cultural change, but equally weather-wise, compared to the UK, especially Scotland. Singapore is much warmer, much more humid as well. So trying to adjust to the climate and being sort of able to keep reptiles outdoors in a tropical climate is very different from obviously how I've kept them in the UK. So in the UK, you're very much keeping them indoors, trying to keep them warm enough. Whereas in the tropical climate, in some cases, you're trying to keep them cool enough so they're not overheating. So it's looking at things basically the opposite to how you would be in the UK to try and sort of maximise your sort of ultimate sort of reptile keeping and make sure that you're doing it as well as you possibly can.
Yeah, it's like a different skill set doing it outside. Luke's been doing it a lot longer than both of us over here. I'm guessing you found the same sort of challenges, Luke?
Yeah, we do. Like, there are obvious challenges and hurdles, but I think honestly one of the biggest challenges is, and I can speak more from European state in America, but it's just how lucky we are in Europe in regards to the level that the majority of our keeping's at, our baseline, and the equipment we have available.
Yeah,
like, I've been fortunate enough not just to work in Singapore, but kind of all over the world with different projects. And I guess you'll see little bits of it here, but getting hold of just things that we take for granted.
Yeah,
even how we get hold of our live food, to breed our own, right through to enclosures, right through to furnishings, heating, lighting, the things that we take for granted is, really lucky. Dealing with power cuts today, when natural life support systems changes a little bit from maybe what we're used to, though we do see that. So there's definite challenges. I think Steve mentioned keeping reptiles outside has always been kind of like the goal. There's so few species we can do. Certainly in the UK where we were, there's a couple of days a year things can go out, but generally. But the challenges that come with that have been really interesting for anyone who's not done it. Keeping reptiles in the tropics comes with its own challenges and hurdles, and then the challenges that quite often in the countries where we know the least about keeping these species outside, we have the least diagnostic tools available to be able to understand those challenges, whether it be veterinary diagnostics or just simple knowledge and capacity. So it's it's fun, but that keeps it really interesting. I think it's fascinating.
It can become a bit I don't know, boring is the right word, but when you start dialing it in the UK or somewhere like that, it becomes a bit stagnant maybe. So it's nice to get to do the stuff outside.
A different challenge.
Yeah, for sure. Is most of the collection outdoors in Singapore, or is it a mix?
Bit of a mix. So
Yeah.
we do have got Reptopia as our main sort of reptile house, but then we do have a selection of reptiles that are outside, spread amongst the different parks that are owned by the Mandai Wildlife Group. But the Singapore Zoo site, we have got things like Komodo dragons outside.
Oh, nice.
We have got the Salvadori monitors. We also have things like giant tortoise, aldabrans, and various other turtles and sort of lots of exciting species that I've not worked with before.
Yeah.
Especially when you start going down the crocodilian route as well. We've got Indian gharial in the
Oh, wow.
collection,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's quite an amazing species to be able to work with, and hopefully, all being well, we'll do well with them.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, your collection's quite diverse. You were saying how many species you working with, or animals you're working with?
So our collection is over 2,000 heads that we have. If you look across the 5 parks that we manage under Mandai, so the main predominant one being the zoo. So we have a really large Chelonian collection.
Okay.
And quite a number of amphibians, and then so quite diverse across taxa, which is great. As a zoo as a whole, we're a lot bigger than that, obviously.
Yeah.
It specialised to us, we're around that. So that brings with it its own challenges. So about 50% of the collection is indoors, as we'd be used to in controlled facilities, and then the other 50%, predominantly Chelonians and crocodilians, we predominantly manage outside, which is a nice challenge.
Do any like indoor-outdoor cages like we do here?
Yeah, we do as well, and we manipulate. One thing we're really keen on, and we're seeing this grow across the hobby as well, but is to trying to do more evidence-based husbandry. So trying to back up what we do, and when you do that, even in a climate such as Singapore, you realise that actually we do have to provide additional support even for outdoor animals.
Okay.
When we look at Well, so often we'll provide supplementary heating and lighting even to the animals that are outside.
Okay.
So we'll shelter, whether it be a quarter, visit it, give access to indoor areas like you guys do.
Yeah.
Give that option. So I think when we look at animals under human care or animals within the captive environment, one of the predominant things when we look at that, we take away really is choice.
Yeah.
And I think often we underestimate how important that is.
Yeah.
How many problems that can mitigate. To give animals the options, quite often they will regulate themselves. And just how little we still understand about their environment, and how important different aspects of it are, whether it just be a few minutes under additional heat source to get that core body temperature up, whether it's complexity or visual barriers. I think we've still got a lot to learn, even with species we do well with, how these animals fully use and fully need their environment and need it within it. So for me, the simplest way to combat that is just to offer, give that choice back. So all our outdoor animals, predominantly croc sniffing, have supplementary heat. So
okay.
You'll know from here, our wet seasons are tough.
Yeah.
And there's very little direct sunlight
Yeah.
that hits these animals for a length of time. Those core body temperatures must come up.
Yeah.
If you don't, then you tend to see things like bacterial infections, funguses, things that we don't normally associate with seeing happen more frequently. Because
It's just
these animals
and humid and
and I think their immune systems just aren't quite there. They're alive, they're doing okay, but it's more of a maintenance temperature and being able to give them that extra
sort
food and just to dry off. Again, people go, they come from a rainforest, but when you break that down into a microhabitat and look at it, there's always access to retreat, access to dry areas, and the ability to follow the sun wherever it goes to be able to access that resource, where under human care, that can be limited to how much space we give them. And where we build an enclosure, something as simple as that. Build it in the wrong part of a site.
It's no good. We have the same issues. Are you involved with that, Luke and Steve, in the actual planning of where the enclosures go, or is that more
to a degree? But we try to get involved from the early stages when we're reconsidering rooms. They're the sort of things we want to look at, especially if we want to do outdoor habitats for our animals, which considering
which way the sun's coming up,
which way the sun comes up, and then back that with everything else, the safety of our guests, the experience of our guests.
You've got that other element.
Container the animals. In Singapore, it's quite unique because we have a lot of native wildlife as well. So pythons, cobras, monitor lizards. We have South Beta, we have Nebulosa, we have stuff that will co-interact. So we have to make sure that everything we move to an outdoor habitat is secure and safe.
So do you want to just say, you were telling me earlier, but do you want to just say for the listeners some of the challenges you've had with the native wildlife, especially the pythons?
Yeah, so pythons are a huge risk that we always have to manage. We obviously we're a collection of animals, and we have to be careful that we're managing those properly so that there's no predation risk or
So
things like that can happen.
they're actually getting into your exhibit.
Yeah, I think all across places where these animals
Yeah.
are thing that can happen. So
Yeah.
it's a risk we take really serious and we manage. So we don't leave a lot of our animals with nighttime access. Obviously, the predominant time for the pythons feed. We're very lucky because we have a night zoo as well, so we always have staff on site.
Okay,
In regards to
that's
Singapore
brilliant.
Zoo.
Yeah.
But some of the zoos in the region don't have that.
Yeah.
Or breeding facilities in situ that we work with don't have those.
Yeah.
Things like pythons, we just ultimately consider really.
No, not at all.
Okay,
No, no,
keeping it where from.
I'd
So.
never considered it until you told me earlier.
Yeah. So these things can happen, and when we're setting up or we're working with partners in the field that are setting up these conservation programs, this is another aspect we have to consider at times, which is predation.
Yeah.
So we have to be safe for that. And for those of us that keep snakes and know how difficult it would be to keep them in, keeping them out is just as difficult as well. So we're always striking that balance. And obviously, primary goal for us is to our native wildlife in Singapore, for instance, is protected. So our main goal, of course, with snake and feed as well is that no injury comes to the wild animals.
Yeah, of course.
So you're always striking that balance between it, but we do really well, very minimal.
Yeah, it's just something I hadn't even thought of. Like I was saying to you earlier, we've got civets that go around the farm. They're a bit of a worry, but yeah, I've never really had any problems with other snakes or other reptiles getting into anything. Pests, again, keeping stuff outside, people don't realise. Pest species like ants we were talking about earlier and ticks and stuff makes it a whole new challenge again. And I was speaking to, I think it was Scott Iper in Australia. They get cane toads obviously in Australia, so they have to make their enclosures cane toad proof to stop anything getting in. I think he had an unfortunate accident with a parenti, with a cane toad getting in with one of his parentis, and it munched on it and unfortunately passed away. So the outdoor keeping is a challenge, and I think you're a bit ahead of me and Steve here with when it comes to that experience.
Yeah, definitely. When you speak to people with it, there's such complexity and issues that you. And what I find really interesting as well is just how many of the issues that when I was coming up and keeping, I imagined if we could just keep these animals outside. If we had the climate, then they would simply resolve. Whether that be egg issues, cycling animals, all the things that we see that I thought you kind of just wouldn't see if you had them outside. And actually, it's not that simple, which again, I think just goes towards showing the knowledge gaps that we still have. Even with species that are quite commonly bred, when we change up that habitat, when we got to go down into that micro details, I still think there's room to learn.
Oh, for sure.
A lot of it, which is quite exciting as well, really. Some of these species are readily bred, commonly available, but yet still we've got aspects that we still don't understand.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
When you speak to people, I think it becomes more consistent of those patterns. That we're all still having some of the same challenges.
Yeah, massive. Yeah, I thought going to Indonesia. I mean, Peter Fulsham told me that it's not easy because he's obviously been doing it at the farm here for 30 years, and it's like, I think everyone gets in their head when it's in situ, it's going to be a lot easier, and stuff will just breed. You're not going to have any issues with eggs or anything. It almost seems harder sometimes. I mean, that's why I'm lucky we've got that indoor facility now here. It's a lot easier to keep everything controlled inside, where you'd think it'd be the opposite of if they're outside, they're natural, they've got natural UV and everything. It should all be sweet, but it's not.
And what did you find the biggest lesson moving out here with facility of scale? What has been your biggest change from keeping monitors?
Just probably the scale of it is the hardest thing. Like I said to you both, my hands-on stuff with day-to-day maintenance is pretty minimal. I'm doing a lot of ultrasound and stuff because we're more obviously breeder focused to try and get production up. But yeah, just dealing with a large collection, I sort of did use the analogy of spinning plates. So you get one thing going really well, you move on to the next thing, and by the time you've turned around, the plate's wobbling and falling off, and you've got to go back and sort that out again. But yeah, I mean, getting used to, as you're finding probably, Steve, getting used to the weather and stuff's been difficult. And then just facing issues. You get way more issues with the amount of humidity and temperatures we have to deal with. Bacterial issue. I don't had snakes with blisters or anything ever in the UK, really, unless they were kept in really wet conditions, like subpar conditions. But you can keep these snakes, they'll be feeding well and doing really well, and all of a sudden they get a bacterial issue or blister issue, and it becomes a problem pretty quickly.
Yeah, and how have you found the challenge of feeding? You said you've got a large collection. How have you found that barrier? Because that must be new. I guess in the UK you weren't reliant on your own food.
The breeding and feeding. Yeah, I'm pretty lucky here because that was set up pre to me coming here. So they've always been producing their own food. Like I said to earlier, we have obviously a predominantly Muslim background here. So during Ramadan, that sort of went down. That was right when I needed a lot of food, and our production for mice and crickets sort of went down. I ended up smashing our dubia roach colony to try and make up for the mice that we didn't have. But yeah, I mean, that's so important. You must breed your own crickets and stuff at the zoo, do you?
Oh, so Singapore, we do some supplementary stuff. So we breed not so much off staple diet. That's purchased in.
Okay.
It's bred on farms just because of sheer scale, really.
Yeah.
For us, it wouldn't be a business model worth doing, but more specialist food items, earthworms, supplementary fruit flies for our amphibians collections, and then we're really lucky that we also manage the invertebrate department, and they breed species for us, like stick insects and things that we're able to breed more focused for some of the specialist feeders. So for us, that's great for diversity. But no, we don't actually at the moment try to breed.
Okay.
Just because of limited space and resources.
It takes a lot of
I think
space
sometimes people think zoos just have these unlimited resources and spaces, and we don't. Just like any function, we're a business, and we also have to make our limited resources work. So for us, you have to balance it. So for us, no, it doesn't make business sense to do that. But at times we will breed, and at times we control all our own supplement. A really fantastic nutrition department at this zoo, but at previous zoos we've done it all. I've never bred rodents for food. It's never been something
so laborious. I mean, as I was saying to you earlier, most of the staff we got here, that is their sort of job is getting the food for our animals here, and it's so important, vitally important. As soon as you get when you've got such a large collection, you've got to have such a high production rate of all live food, all mice, rats, and everything. As soon as it peters down, we've got animals to feed. You can't go have a bad month, pretty much. You have to keep it up all the time. It's like the most important part of the farm here, and it's difficult to keep it going sometimes, for sure. So, what are some of your favourite species you work with at Singapore Zoo?
Again, obviously from my point of view, Indian gharial is something
that's insane.
Just that something totally new. Obviously we do have things like the false gharial as well, Thomas Stoma. I've not worked with them previously. Komodo dragons are also one that I wanted to kind of work with. And then I've got sort of a soft spot for a lot of the tree monitors as well. So been able to sort of focus attention on them and look at sort of what species we want to breed and see how we can sort of tweak things going forward, and ultimately hopefully being successful with them. Is quite an exciting thing. But again, I suppose going forward there will be other species that sort of come into the play as well. Also have quite a diverse sort of range of species. So again, it's a very exciting collection to be involved in.
Yeah, it seems a bit more. I think got a bit more free will. You were saying earlier, Luke, to get a bit more species. You were saying in Europe and stuff, they seem to be shutting their collections down a bit more, or halving their collections.
Well, definitely, but we're really lucky because we live in one of the biodiversity hotspots. So I think that's the huge difference between us and what Europe can do. Is that we have that availability, though we do lack so like in Singapore, pretty much illegal to keep most exotic animals. There isn't really a trade, though. Funny enough, just like an hour over the border in Malaysia, there's a huge reptile trade, as you know. So it's a strange conundrum, but we can't. So but we're really lucky being one of the biodiversity hotspots with a lot of species that are native to the region, or certainly the region in Southeast Asia. So so we're lucky with some of the species that we get the opportunity to work with, some of the partners that we get the opportunity to work with in the field, and that opens up a lot of species to us. Even if we don't directly have the species of conservation value, we use model species, which we do a lot with our amphibian collection, and our geckos will use more commonly kept model species to work out husbandry protocols and procedures, and then go and be able to implement that in the field, which is kind of exciting and shows that other bridge. I think quite often when we talk about conservation, people assume that it's all about the animals you breed going back to the wild,
like
if you will.
Fallacy almost.
Or the kind of the exit to art philosophy, so that they're a population in case the world ends and they're all needed. I think there are occasions where that's been the case. There's examples and models, famous ones, pink pigeon stuff, where captive breeding has undoubtedly helped species. But I think one of the roles that's often overlooked, and I think certainly from a private keeping perspective, is that knowledge gap. I think one thing that we don't do enough of, whether it be in zoos or it be in the private sector, is to utilize our living collections to be able to understand. The amount of breeders I speak to who are phenomenal, a lot of the expertise in this industry lies in the private sector.
Yeah.
90% of it, but not everybody understands the importance of what they've been doing.
Yeah.
And I think the documentation of that, the amount of people I speak to say, well, we're not scientists.
Yeah.
We don't have to be.
Yeah,
You say this, but then we've spent like 5 hours today chatting in so much detail. And I think to bridge that gap and make people realize that good husbandry, good record keeping, science, it really is. It may not be published, but that data is key. And I think one thing I'm really lucky at, and I think really is the differential between being in the zoos and keeping privately, is the ability to bridge that gap and have that direct link, but understanding that link. I've been fortunate enough to see it, whether it be with the Roti Island turtles, where, that's a species that went extinct in the wild. Undoubtedly, captive breeding saved that animal from extinction. It would be gone.
Right.
And all the knowledge now, when we start talking about conservation and reintroductions, and it's all coming from what was learned under human care in that setting. So I think, that is an underplayed strength that keeping reptiles and amphibians gives us, in particular, that I would encourage and be nice to see more utilization of, successes and failures, because too often the emphasis, I think, is on physically breeding these animals and doing it, which is important, and it's nice. It's, why a lot of us got into this industry, and that excitement never kind of leaves.
Yeah.
But I think actually we underappreciate and underutilize the rest of it. And I do include failures. I think one thing we're pretty terrible at talking about as a community is what didn't go very well. It's great to see platforms like yours where I see people on discussing that, because we can all learn so much. And there's nothing more annoying than failing, but it's worse when I find out you failed on the same thing a year ago. And if we did
let's go back to that. It's quite easy to self-publication now in those herp journals and stuff. Even if you argue, I've spoken to this before with the tree monitor stuff, where there's that ban in the USA, and they're using papers from when we weren't very successful with them, 20 years ago, because nobody's bothered to write anything down now and have it published. They can't reference anything. So if you've been successful with anything, really, it's worth just doing a little note on it, putting it in one of these herp journals, and then a bit like you guys probably do, searching the internet all the time, just seeing, well, I'm having this problem over and over. Is anyone else have this problem, or the success?
Or just do it online. Publishing is great, but even good husbandry knowledge.
I think the problem is I do a lot of Facebook or social media. It gets to the bottom of the pile very quickly. It's hard to search. It's having somewhere you can reference it quite easy. Do you know what I mean? If I put a post up about some monitors that I've bred with all the data and everything, it's on there for a day with some nice pictures. But then in a month's time, there's so much more stuff there. So it'd be good for. I think there's the herp journal, the Bion Centre are doing. That seems to be pretty good one. And what Thomas is involved with. Just have it in a note, and then at least it's referenced. You can reference it then.
Practical reptile keeping.
Practical reptile.
But definitely, man. I think that's just an underutilized aspect of what people are achieving.
I think we've lost that a bit. Back in the early 90s, early 2000s, a lot of people, it was a lot of stuff in magazines. And with that internet, social media stuff, it sort of lost it a bit. I mean, I've searched so many papers on monitors, Salvadori, just to find the incubation time of a Salvadori. It's like, it's hard. It's quite hard when you want the specific information. It's quite hard to find. Perth Zoo did a really good paper on Mitchell's water monitors. I've read them in the UK. And these eggs come out, and they didn't look fertile. There's no veins in them for about 3 months because they have such a long incubation period. So I was like, I wonder if these eggs are actually any good, or are they just slugs that look okay. Perth Zoo had done this amazing paper, and they'd done the weights of the eggs and the measurements. So I was like, I'll go weigh my eggs and measure my eggs. Literally exactly the same as what they'd had with a successful clutch. So I was like, we must be on the right path here. If they weighed the same and it was the same as their successful clutch.
And they hatched.
So they hatched just a long time for an Audatrium monitor. They took 220 days, which is long compared to your Ackies and stuff like that.
But like I say, this isn't readily available for a lot of species, and again,
that's it.
I speak to so many people, and I'm really fortunate to have a network that lets me speak to people breeding some amazing stuff. Especially I know a person that breeds salamander. It's pretty much all he does. Is breed them, and that level of knowledge, just there's very few people out there with it. And to find right now, it's in one person. If anything ever happens to it, hopefully it doesn't. By the way, everyone listening, but there's so many stories like that. How many people do you work with where that?
Loads. I mean,
some of it's been passed down, but there's another 50 years of it in their heads that if we could just capture that, and rightly in a way that the trade, the industry, I think continues to keep evolving. But with that, a lot of the knowledge that previous generations had through the exposure they had and how the industry used to be is gone.
Yeah, or even books.
The diversity attacked. Yeah, even the books.
Nobody reads books anymore. I mean, I've got books there which are like my must books, mostly on pythons and stuff. I was like, I can't go to Indonesia and breed pythons without, you know, the Barker's book or the complete Chondro or something, just so I can reference it. Just be like, oh, we're on the right track here. Yeah. But nobody likes to read anymore. That's the problem.
No, I think we've just got to evolve at the same time of how we get our information across and engage people, but also not lose the past. You know? I think it's okay to have had a past in an industry or a hobby or whatever it is that you look now and you think, well, you know, well, look to husbandry and we were doing and how much it's evolved.
Oh, it's insane. Just,
you know, in the light in 10, 15 years. And I think it's okay to look back now and cringe at your first reptile enclosure or what we didn't know, but it's building up. But I think it's important not to lose that information and those stories. And, you know, even if people were doing stuff which at the time, now you look and think, no, there's so much knowledge been built on those foundations that I think at times we forget that. You know, you move on and somebody becomes the new best breeder and then the previous experience is lost.
Yeah, we're a bit bad with that in the hobby. A lot of the younger people coming up don't realise the work that the older generation has to do with way less information than we've got now and less stuff. The zoo side of things, your record keeping must be top tier. That's what, from what I know from zoos, is a lot of the work is writing records a lot of the time.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it just links back to what I was talking about earlier a little, which is, you know, why do we keep a lot of these species? Yes, very fortunately, we get direct conservation value sometimes, which is fantastic. But quite a lot of the time, we have indirect value. We'll go out to regions and look. It's more coming, and we're seeing a bigger shift towards capacity building.
Right.
So it's all about taking knowledge and skill sets that we have and implementing them in the region where it matters.
Right.
You know, almost like you're kind of doing here and the work you're doing with some of the people you work with in the field. It's about taking that knowledge and experience we've learned and then putting it where it matters and building capacity in country, in range of these animals, because ultimately that's where conservation's got to happen, not us.
Yeah.
You know, captive breeding's got a role to play, but ultimately solo, it's a bandage on a wound. If we do not stop the problems and solve the reasons that are putting the pressure on these populations and species, captive breeding alone will not solve the issues. So I feel like it's got to be part of a big conversation. So from a zoo record point of view, it's a huge emphasis for us because it underpins everything that we do.
Is that knowledge shared quite? How do you share the knowledge between the zoos? Is it just through papers, or is there conferences, or do you know if you've been pretty successful with, you know, Salvador, for example, and another zoo wants that information? Are you requested to give them the information on it? How does that sort of work?
So between various ways. We have platforms to share. So we have regional and international meetings. Yeah. As you know, a lot of zoos are accredited. EASA, BIASA, the British one, European, American. So there's communication between, and then just like peer-to-peer, just as you guys would in the hobby more so. Like you get networks that you know. And then people just email and request as well. You know, zoos usually are quite good at publicizing when they have success. So, you know, often so much more than the private sector even. So quite often, you know, they'll put it out there and that's a platform then for people to reach out and say, well, how are you doing that? And fill in those gaps. But quite often when it comes to the more interesting, intricate species, then that connection's already there. You know, you're already working in groups with people who are working between these species, whether it be private sector or the zoo.
How much work do you do with the private sector? That used to irk me a lot with zoos, especially in Europe. You guys are super open to it. You wouldn't be here if you were open to working with, as we are, sort of the private sector. Do you think there's still a bias with the zoos against the private sector? And that's how I felt for a lot of my life with how successful we are in the private sector, and sometimes it seems to annoy zoos. Or they don't want to take the information from the private sector. Have you found that at all, or not really?
Yeah, I think it's very individual, and I think it can be quite individual institutes as well. So this is not me speaking on behalf of my institute. It's more my personal experience with it. But I think it can work both ways, is the honest answer.
Yeah.
I think that, like I said earlier, I think that the big primary difference between zoo and private is that we're more regulated in a lot of senses. Now, I know there can be strict regulations, but we are extremely regulated in regards to what we have, good and bad, that comes with that. But from a knowledge perspective, undoubtedly, there's more knowledge in the private sector, there's more people keeping,
Yeah.
and a level of specialism that is difficult to get within zoos because you just don't have capacity.
Yeah.
When you look at the amount of monitors you manage here,
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably the same as the population of all zoos put together.
Yeah, it's
Managed programs.
Yeah,
So, I do think there can be a little bit of it, but I think often it's built on a level of misunderstanding about the differences. That one is less than the other, and to me, they're not really. They're a different way of coming at the same goal.
Yeah.
Within reason, and I think the first thing's got to be said is there's good and bad in both.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And I think that's the truth. That there's bad zoos, and I'm sure, and I'm not as involved in it now because there's somewhere you can't. But there's bad in the hobby as well.
Oh yeah.
But there's also great, and I think that doesn't get talked about enough. Zoos do when there's great zoos, and I'm very fortunate. We work in a great one. There's many great institutions. They get praised. What I think doesn't get enough coverage is when the private sector does great work.
Yeah.
And there is great work, and I think that the private reptile trade has had tarnished past. It did things in the past that maybe weren't so sustainable, weren't so ethical.
Yeah.
And that has, there's some people like to keep that high ground, but you see the evolution in it just in my time keeping. You see the efficacy of where people want to move. And I think that the more conversations that people can have, then the less that barrier will work.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, Luke, because there seems to be this barrier. It seems to be less with like zoos like Rotterdam Zoo and stuff like that. They used to do a lot more with the private sector.
Yeah. But Europe's done some great work to bridge that gap. If you look at the Dixon conservation work that they're doing, you look at the European Studbook Foundation, this bridge that actually we all want the same thing.
Yeah.
One of the big differentials really is money. It comes down a lot to the one group sell their animals, the other group don't. Which often is distinguished as like the reason people are doing it. But I think that's an oversimplification.
Yeah.
I don't think that the two things are always cohesive to each other.
Because the zoos are so much of a business now, maybe, do you think they're worried about getting tarnished with some of the bad stuff that goes on within the private sector? Maybe just not wanting to get involved, maybe sourcing animals from someone that they need. You said to me earlier there needs to be a lot of stuff that goes into sourcing animals now, where before maybe it wasn't so hard. Do you know what I mean? It seemed like in the past.
I think there's got to be a level. There's got to be an ethical line that you have, and I think that it should be the same ethical line for everyone. Yeah, it really should with sustainability. But obviously, I think zoos are in the forefront there, and that's what I mean. Stand there, so I think they get held to that more than maybe say a private keeper does, who no one's ever heard of. Yeah, so I think you've got to remain what that public pressure looks like, but also the efficacy. We've got the access to those partnerships in region. Sometimes the private sector doesn't have. So we see the other end of that, the legislative end, the end that shows the impacts that aren't always there, good and bad. So for me, it's just continue open dialogue. I think the more that the two start acting and work together, I think the more you'll see actually that there's more in common than differences. And like I say, it's accepting that there's great work in both. Yeah, I think that's really important. There's some amazing zoos that do incredible work. There really is, and not just zoos, but conservation organisations that do amazing work. But there's also some amazing keepers. Now, I don't like to be calling the two things differently. My eyes are all herpetologists, but there's amazing work going on, and the more we just concentrate on amazing work and stop with the divides, that's what it seems. I think we put those in place as a community, that we have these different levels, and to me, I'm not sure it's necessarily that good is good, bad is bad, and then there's grey in the middle that we can all discuss. And I think the more we just have open conversations and see that there's strength in both, like if we're serious about having managed ex-situ populations, then we need space and facilities and numbers, and these are all challenges that we don't have. And you'll see these hybridizations of these facilities now that aren't necessarily private hobbyists, but equally not a licensed zoo. And I think you'll see a lot more of them come to fruition over time. And they're interesting conversations. I think that will we sit here in 10, 15 years and look back and say it was the right way, the wrong way? I think it's all interesting. Evolve. For sure. Yeah, I think you guys are just under the spotlight a bit more. We all know dodgy things that go on in Europe or whatever with animals that people shouldn't have. I think the zoos might have, in the past, got some of the animals and, been put under the spotlight, especially in America and stuff, with some of the stuff, I don't know if you know about Hank Bolt, was sort of getting illegal animals that the zoos were buying over there. And then they're the ones under the spotlight almost more than he was. And yet he was the one doing the bad stuff. So it's, like I said, it's your
in the limelight a lot more than the dodgy German guy or whatever you want to call it that's got a few animals that you shouldn't have. Or if you've got some animals that turn out to be not so legitimate in one of your zoos, it's going to cause a bigger problem.
Yeah, I think one of the key things to do is, a large part of why we exist is to engage and educate people as well. And you've got to, we can't be hypocrites in that. And like I said, we're really fortunate where we are that we strike that balance because we don't have to do that. But I think it all comes down to education and communication. Really, if we bridge that gap, then this divide. And I've seen it decrease over time. I don't think it's as strong as it was. As it used to be, but I think that it's still a long way to go on that front.
That's really good. That's really positive.
Dehybridization now. What's the meeting in the UK now where it's
the
AHH?
Yeah,
I think you see conferences like that now where you're just seeing these pools of people mix.
Yes,
these pool of expert mix. Whether it's the specialist groups as well. You now see everything from farms. Look at crocodile specialist group. You now see everything from farms to zoo to privacy to everything coming together. And these are the groups that you see doing the most impactful work. So to me, they should be a lessons, the template lesson. That, actually, everyone can bring something to the table. And even if people are doing things that may not be the most sustained way forward, communication and talking to them is the best way to change behavior, to change that route, to understand it from all causes. I think we can be quite guilty sometimes of just understanding things from a pedestal, a privileged position that we get. Not understanding drivers behind some of these issues on the ground. Which I circle back to. If we don't fix those, you mentioned a great example earlier, but if you remove some of these livelihoods, then you're going to change that direction and make the problem worse. So that doesn't mean that necessarily that's the route, but I don't think it's always just as simple as yes, no, this. And a lot of these populations, more work needs to be done, and that where the emphasis needs to come. What is sustainable? What isn't? How do we bridge these gaps? What impact does that have beyond just whether I think you should have something or not? And so to me, it's a fascinating conversation that could be a podcast on its own. And there's such strong opinions on every front. Often I think we just pick these institutions or the names and make it about that, where actually to me the conversation is much deeper than that.
There's a lot to be learned. It's refreshing to hear that from you, Luke, because I don't know, in the UK it seemed that there was a bit of elitism towards being in a zoo. The private sector had quite a lot of success, so if we can all work together, then I think the private keepers might want to share a bit more information, share their animals with the zoos, and get a few more things going on. But enough on that. That's very very political. So go back to tree monitors, as we're a monitor podcast. How are you finding them at the zoo? How are you keeping them? Maybe Steve, get a word in edgeways.
Sorry. Obviously, the tree monitors were keen to kind of see how you guys are working on here, and sort of gain a bit of an understanding as to how you're doing things, and what we could potentially tweak kind of going forwards with ours as well. It's really exciting. Obviously, it's one of the things that I've always wanted to work with more. So having the opportunity to have a few species to work with, and I suppose it's gaining that sort of knowledge and understanding from sort of private individuals that have been doing well with them. Again, within my career, I've been able to keep some tree monitors in different institutions, but again, I've never really bred them. So it's understanding sort of any of the sort of little I suppose, tricks of the trade. Sort of any little tweaks and sort of husbandry, sort of intricacies that we need to kind of look at to make it as successful as possible, and ultimately sort of making sure there's a really good sustainable sort of population for going forwards as well. So
what species have you got at the zoo?
So that's, at the minute, obviously we've got Prasinus, we've got McRae, we've got Coming Eye, and that obviously goes into bigger sort of monitors, into the Komodos and things as well. But tree monitor wise, just the Prasinus and McRae are the ones that we're really kind of focused on at the moment. So that's what we're going to look at.
Any reason for picking them two?
No. So, well, kind of a bit of a mix, really. They're beautiful. They're quite iconic.
Yeah.
They're a little bit more freely available. Like the Prasinus for us are part of a breeding program.
Okay.
They're part of an EP, which is a European endangered program. So
Yeah.
they're part of a breeding program for us. So important from that aspect.
Yeah.
Our McRae actually came through the trade predominantly, in the sense that they will confiscate animals, the original males, and then it made sense to pair them up.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they're the ones really for us that we're seeing the most often.
Yeah.
And then there's the most population within the network that we work. So for us, that made more sense. To have them as a focal.
They're the iconic too.
Yeah, they're the iconic too.
You've got to have a blue tree monitor in the zoo. There's not much.
Yeah, they're beautiful. I think, they're one of those species that transcends niche.
Yeah.
So like they're all beautiful to me, but I think when we start getting into cord denses, the different localities, I think that's where you see a differential between reptile people and the rest of
the
I think for them, it's a bright green, it's a bright blue monitor. And again, I come back to it without trying to sound that, our job is to engage and inspire as well. With collections.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's a constant struggle in life when you do it professionally versus do it. Well, it'd be like yourselves, I guess. You have to breed what the needs are, not necessarily your interests. And we're in that same boat. Our reptile facility, for instance, is 19 windows to inspire people to like reptiles and amphibians.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, it don't matter the conservation stories.
You've
got to find a mix. You want to get that odd, unique species in. You want to get things in that you can tell stories with, that you can get people done. But ultimately, the animals tend to do most of that themselves. So the great thing about the McRae and Prasinus, super active. Color and movement seem to be the two big wins for people when you're trying to inspire them. And those animals have it in abundance. So from that perspective, they're really great.
Oh yeah, you can't get much better. They're
and they breed quite well once they establish. These are species now that we should be able to establish in. Is
there much work within the zoos worldwide for the tree monitors? Have they sort of noted it as something that needs to be bred in the zoos?
Yeah, so there's the breeding programs for them. So McRae and Prasinus are under those populations and breeding relatively well. I think one of the big challenges from a population management point of view is just the founder population is quite small.
You said,
these are things that have to grow out. That's quite often a challenge you see because, like I say, we don't deal with anywhere near the number across all zoos that you're dealing with just here. And I think, that's one of the strengths and one of the challenges that we have when it comes to keeping the species is the sample size, if I can use that terminology, is so small that often it's quite hard to determine some things. So, when we're looking at some of the barriers and challenges we face, then it takes that communication between different organizations and people like yourselves to understand what the patterns are, because you might be able to come to that conclusion. We were talking about ultrasonography earlier, ultrasounding, but when you have two animals, two females, it's very hard to see what an average and a baseline is with two animals. And most people, whether it be in zoos like ourselves or even just private individuals, have such small sample sizes that actually this is where you see, when we call it a reptile keeping community, that this is where it needs to come together, because that's where you can start getting these answers. And I think that's a fascinating one. I don't know how long you've known people doing ultrasonography with monitors, but
not too
we
long.
were lucky to have that facilities, obviously, as we were talking about.
It's come over really from the Royal Python side of it, which they've been doing it for a lot longer, and they're just getting production. They breed millions now of Royal Pythons, and they worked out pretty early on how productive you can be from a single male of putting it with a female that's going through, follicular development at the right time. And then I just found a random video on YouTube like I was showing you earlier. I was like, has anyone done this with monitors? And then the price of the ultrasounds now has come down to a really reasonable level. They're fairly cheap. Just learning how to use them is a bit of a challenge. And knowing what you're looking at, a bit like you were saying earlier, I can see what a follicle is, but if you told me that's got cancer or something like that, I wouldn't have a clue, or what I'm looking at after I can see the heart. But it's a really, really useful tool. I think it's going to be coming in a lot more. They've utilised it in the private sector, really, on the Royal Pythons, and they're smashing them out now. They can really get them going. And the same thing will happen with the monitors. The smaller monitors are a bit harder, but like your Salvador and stuff, it's really easy to ultrasound them, and your water monitors. And it's really interesting as well. I mean, that's, as I was saying earlier, the challenge of this place having so many animals. Just some of these females that you'd never think were going through a cycle. The ultrasound, it's got these big follicles in there, and you look at it and you're like, how has that got 20 follicles, 16 follicles in it, and it looks like a rake. But you know, you ultrasound it, put a male in, they'll lock up, and you get eggs. So you know, and that'll be one I missed because we're so production focused here. You know, if I was just doing it by eye like I used to at home with the tree monitors, I'd go, oh no, she's not ready to breed, but she is. It's just that lack of knowledge. So utilising that tool. I mean, you guys are super lucky. You've got a really good one and a vet staff on hand as well, which you know must be amazing to have that.
Yeah, it's a huge resource. Yeah, I think that's often overlooked. I think it's definitely one of the strengths of certainly the top end of the zoo world is that we have a lot of facilities and resources. You know, and we're really lucky to have that. You know, that's probably one of the differential factors. Though the practice soon builds that up as well. But we're very lucky from a veterinary healthcare point of view. It's amazing.
Yeah, amazing.
You know, we can speak for Singapore. That's fine on this to say that. Yeah, we're really lucky.
Yeah,
we have a really talented vet team and amazing facilities. So yeah, that's really important from us, from our perspective, from disease risk management point of view, from healthcare management, and proactive healthcare as well. Because I think one big differential for us is because it doesn't directly cost us. We can be really proactive with our healthcare. So we do a lot of health checking and screening before there is an issue.
Yeah,
kind of like you're learning now with the ultrasonography that actually, quite often I think in the private industry, we often wait for a problem to start looking for it.
It's too late with the reptiles.
Yeah, it's quite often it is. You know, they're so cryptic that by the time you see something, you're too far down. I think especially reproductive wise, and then when it goes wrong internally, obviously
it's too late by that.
Yeah, it's too late, and often getting a clear answer on what that is very difficult because it's a real mess. Especially if you haven't got the diagnostic tools available. Things that we used to just put down as, oh, this happens, or this, or this folklore husbandry that creeps in. You know, I think Boleyn's piping's been a great example of that. You know, open the door at this age, they die. To you know,
the loads of these myths and, like I said, folklore. And
actually, you know, having the data and science and capacity and funding to be able to look into that is cool. So.
Yeah. Just go back to the tree monitors. You said the found-in stock was quite a small number. Is there no? I know the zoos are really important about not inbreeding everything. You must have to keep stud books for that. Is there no push to get any new found-in stock?
Yes, we do, but we have policies on the acquisition of animals, of course, and how we go about doing that and done. So there are found-in stock that comes in. They can come in by different ways. Captive bred individuals. They can be confiscations that can confiscate and end up there. So there's many different routes that these things can come in. So but it's just a slow build. You know, we've got to make sure we do that and then do the genetic work on the animal populations that we already have. Because a lot of the time, not all species, probably not even the tree monitors, but a lot of the found in stuff is old animals that necessarily the genetic work wasn't done when they were originally obtained. So it's not got like the locality data always to back up. You know,
that's
in species like
quite an issue.
The monkey-tailed skink sabrata that got split. And as taxonomy keeps evolving and splitting these species. These are complex challenges that we're all dealing with. So,
I'm trying to keep it really. Well, you see my posts and stuff, trying to keep everything locality because I can just see. I'm really interested in taxonomy and I've followed it for years on end now. It's like if it looks a bit different and something going on, surely we should just be keeping it, you know, until we've really known the genetic work's been done. Just to say, you know, it's very easy to breed two things together that can be potentially new species in the future. So
fascinating. Another podcast in itself.
Lots to go on. The Salvador have had good success in the past at Singapore Zoo.
Yeah, so Singapore's really lucky now. We bred 2 generations. So they do really well. With us, they're a species that the zoos have a lot of success with. The previous team before my time wrote the best practice guidelines for them, which is quite a comprehensive document.
I've seen the document. I was going to give that a shout out.
Omar and the team can have a look. It's available online if anyone's interested. Just Google it. But it's a really solid baseline.
Really,
again,
I
think what's really important on these is they're living documents that need to continuously be upgraded as we get more data. You know, they're not write it once and we're done. I think these things have always got to keep being built on, but hopefully they do. They're still a species I think there's more to learn about. There's more work to be done on them. For all the successes we have, there's still challenges that everybody who keeps this species seems to face. Differences in approaches. Some people keep their pairs together. Some people don't, like yourselves. It's been really interesting to understand what some of those barriers are. So again, another species that I think, you know, we're very fortunate that we have the climate to keep them outside, which allows us to overcome some of the challenges I think we see with captive monitors, which is primarily based around health and fitness, I think, as much as anything else.
Yeah, as many as we sell that probably end up indoors.
Yeah.
Now keeping them outdoors, I think I would struggle unless it was like a room like we're in now. It's so difficult when you see them, you know, climbing trees and stuff. It's they're a beast in themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think
such a large monitor and an active monitor as well. To you know, we're super lucky to have them outdoors.
Yeah, I think that weight management's really important, and I think that the habitat complexity is really important whether you're keeping them inside or outside. I don't think we always put enough emphasis on habitat complexity. For some weird reason, reptile keepers were quite bad at building everything flat.
Yeah.
We love a good flat base of an exhibit and a flat enclosure, and we stick a few branches in where actually I think topography is quite important.
Yeah.
I think Komodo was a great example of that.
Yeah.
When there it's pretty steep.
Yeah,
and I think there's very few areas that are flat. And I think certainly when it comes to some of these heavier bodied lizards is that we often put branching and rely on the animals. We rely on enrichment feeding to get these animals to do movements, where actually if the exhibit was designed differently, just the basic movement cause it. So they call it escalator people in syndrome, escalator syndrome in people, that people are getting fatter because they don't walk. You're even going up steps now, even like the subway steps in cities and stuff used to keep people fitter. Yeah. Because you have no choice, you have to go up the steps, and now you don't. And I think we're doing that often to some of the species we keep. That, you know, we're giving them these branched environments and stuff, but realistically, they only utilize them when it has to. So I think to think of it in that way, and how can we encourage that movement outside of food, being the only motivator, I think is really important. So can be setting up multiple lighting rigs and rotating your time in which rig is on, so that even basking becomes something optional. And I think just creative play on how we do our habitats and how we think about that day cycle for an animal, rather than just, you know, light and heat's down here, food up there when it wants to.
Or even just feeding them less, Luke. You know, they start feeding just not for that, but just get them to move around.
Yeah,
if they're getting food and they know, you know, tomorrow I'm going to get fed again, they don't need to move around. If you start, you know, feeding them less, they actually are patrolling around looking for the food. And as we alluded to earlier, I think the diet's obviously a lot different in the wild. It's very easy to get a monitor fat in captivity by giving it, you know, not loads of food, where in the wild, and we'll get to it in a minute with the Salvador and stuff you see in the wild, they're all skinny, really fit things. So it's difficult to not just overfeed them in captivity. I think people like seeing stuff eat. I think that's one of the issues.
It's quite anthropomorphic, I think.
If it's eating, it's healthy.
Some people struggle with the concept of, you know,
leaving it without some food for a
leaving it without enough food, or it looks hungry, or showing a response.
Yeah, and when you go past it, I've said it before on the podcast, especially with the tree monitors, there's like this stage, especially with females, if it doesn't get a clutch out of them and they retain that fat, then it can take almost a year to 2 years for them to get back and actually go into breeding. There's a very fine line of stepping over that line, they're not having any eggs, and then you just got a fat monitor for 2 years. And it's once the weight's on, it's really hard to get it off.
Did you find that across most species?
Yeah,
especially like South Haters and some of the feeders.
The bigger the monitor is, actually the worse it gets, because they can eat so much, and you're giving them bigger food items anyway. Once you've stepped over, I mean, to get them to cycle, you need to get them some food. But I think I fall into the trap, especially with the tree monitors, of trying to get them into a cycle quickly, giving them too much food, the female not being quite ready, and then just retaining all that fat around the body mass, and then it just takes forever. I've got some Mitchell's water monitors that Peter's looking after in England, and I've starved. I mean, like, not fed them for months on end, or fed them very, very little, just insect based. I was like, they've got to start losing weight, and they just don't. They just go into this retain mode, like a starvation mode almost, where they're not using much. They sort of slow down, and they're not using that fat, so it just stays on them.
What do you think about diversity of diets for captive reptiles?
Because as much as you can get.
I think it's a huge challenge for us, is the diversity of what we offer these species.
I mean, the amount of the different types of insects you see, and we'll get into the field stuff in a minute, but the amount of different insects you just see in the field, which for sure the tree monitors are picking off. And they've all got different nutritional values and stuff. It might eat a load of katydids because they're in season, but then it might be going to a stick insect because there's a load of them about, and even different areas of the forest where you might have one eating more katydids or eating more grasshoppers. we're feeding a few different species of stuff, especially us here. We've got a couple of species of cockroach, maybe if you're lucky some locust, and then one species of cricket, where we can probably go outside now and probably find 4 or 5 different species of cricket here in West Java. So let alone when you get to Papua, they've got an even bigger diversity of insects, and they're not just, oh, that's not the one I like, I'm not going to eat that one. It's not a gracilis or whatever, cricket. So yeah, it's super important. And then I think we feed way too many rodents, high, lab-based rodents that they don't get. You look at some of the marsupials and mice and stuff you get in Papua and these other places. They're not full of fat. They're eating fruits and different stuff. So it's not the same as a European lab rodent that we're chucking in. So
how do you think we overcome that? From all your work with monitors, is it just a reduction in food in your eyes? Is it
I don't think we can
concentrate on diversity? What do you think is the biggest way to counter that challenge?
I think we're always going to have the challenge, Luke, and we've tried to do it, say with the locusts. We've got a native species of locust here. You cannot produce the amount of food you need in captivity for some of these species. Like katydids is even quite hard to do, and you can get them to breed, but being able to produce the amount of numbers, we've got these domestic almost insects and stuff I've been breeding for years, mealworms and your domestic crickets. Some insects just don't work like that. So if you can supplement it every now and then go for it. But as a staple diet, I don't think we'll ever get to what they get in the wild. I think we just got to work with what we've got almost, and just not feed too many rodents.
And this might be obvious to some people listening, especially those that breed it, but I think you're a better seated place to answer this than some, because of just the pure number of animals that you do breed. But do you see a direct correlation between the female's body condition and the reproductive success that you see?
Yeah, how do you mean?
Like, so if they're too heavy, under conditioning, directly correlates to breeding success.
As soon as you get overweight, you get egg binding and egg problems, or they'll produce really healthy eggs, but they can't pass them. Something will happen. We had a Salvadori, an old female that had been just overfed. Bred fine, was really good, really excited to get a clutch out of her. Ultrasound, everything looked perfect, and then she just died egg bound. Cut her open to see what's going on, and just a twisted egg in the ovary duct. And I'm sure it's because there's loads of fat packing around those ovaries that's caused the problem. Where the skinnier females don't seem to ever have a problem with egg binding. It's always the bigger females. But you get the other problem if they're too skinny and they have a clutch. Getting the weight back onto them can be an issue. Building them back up for next season. It's an issue. You want to keep them as optimum as you can, really.
Interesting.
But yeah, overweight seems to cause more problems than underweight. The underweight ones will just tend to reabsorb, or you just get a good clutch out of them, but that might be it for maybe 2 years. For the true monitors we got here, some of them that bred last year, I've looked at and I was like, no, there's no way they're going again this year. They just still haven't put that amount of weight back on.
Interesting.
So go to the field stuff. The Salvadori you've seen in the field.
Yeah, really lucky to have the opportunity to see so many species. And I think we talked about it a little bit earlier off the podcast, but just the difference in condition of these animals and in situ compared to what we see within the captive setting is night and day. I think it makes you rethink really, how we're keeping these species. And like you say, maybe life's just a bit too good. That's too simplified a way to say it, but I think it's good to. I think we just. Life's just too good in captivity. There's drives,
no predation or anything like that.
No predation, too much food.
Not
enough energy expenditure.
High calorie food.
Too much high calorie. Yeah. Kind of mirrors what we see with people, really. We all have it a bit too easy. We were talking about this earlier.
That's why I've lost.
You're behind it.
2 stone.
Singapore's got too good a living, as you can see. So I would not be breeding this year for everyone listening. So it's I think these are interesting, but I think we've got a lot we can learn from that. Maybe there's not enough emphasis on that. And like you say, I think your conversation just about the impact of that. I think sometimes we know with people, if you're overweight, it's not good for you. That's well proven. And sometimes that's overlooked, I think, when it comes to animals in general. Even cats, dogs, people having fat. If it was thin, everybody's kind of on board. A thin animal, even you shouldn't breed, you should feed more. You have a problem. But still, I think obese we kind of know now, like an obese animal isn't good. I think we can all say that, but I think there's a line between
just
obese and find that middle ground where actually we might be on that progress to doing damage. And I think that is the area where we as a community still got a lot to learn about what these animals actually require versus what is overindulgence.
Yeah, there's a great post. I can't remember. I think it was Matt Somerville. Scott can correct me when he watches this. There's Nim Ingram's brown snake from Australia, and he'd been feeding this thing. I think it was like 2 mice. I'm paraphrasing it. It was like two mice a year, and it died. And he opened it up, and it still had fat bodies in it. So they must be eating literally nothing in the wild. And this thing was overweight, yet he'd been trying. He knew a lot about the their natural behavior and how little they eat. And this thing, he'd been trying to keep it skinny, like really actively doing it, cuts it open, big fat bodies in there still. So it's very difficult in that sense. The work with the Salvador was in Papua New Guinea proper.
Yeah, so we're into PNG to see that at one of the national parks, which is really interesting.
Really rare to get over that side.
It's a really beautiful habitat.
Yeah,
a really beautiful place, quite remote still. And I think that's quite an exciting opportunity still for research of species in the field. There's still big data gaps about what we don't understand about them. The use of their habitat and what their preferences are. And so I think, and interesting, again, the species bred quite readily under human care, but yet still huge knowledge gaps about
nesting,
what the normal nesting, any of that natural history behavior is still quite limited.
We
know where they are, we roughly know which habitats they use, but once you get past that, for a lot of these species, they're data deficient. And again, if we're serious about conservation efforts for them, then that's going to be it. And then that'll be fascinating to look that data across what places like yourselves are seeing with the breeding habits. And really, look, we talk about egg laying the other day with species, but some of these species clearly aren't. Where are they laying? Where are these?
It's just
you see
a lot of the monitors,
these whole data gaps that we just don't see. And I think that's super exciting.
Definitely.
And you found, Steve, on your travels.
Boris, I've not been to Papua, so I've not been able to see that side of things. But obviously, again, just thinking about gathering as much data and as much natural history sort of behaviour on the species to gain a better understanding of what they're using, where they're using, and how they can sort of implement that.
It's just guesswork otherwise, isn't it? You think of a rainforest species or an arid species is the biggest one. When I started going over to Australia quite a lot, you think desert, it's not got any humidity or it's not got any. You get into these little micro habitats where you're actually finding the animals. It's like, it might be 40, 50 degrees there, but it's under a stone where it's a lot cooler, it's a lot wetter and stuff until you've actually been there and looked for it.
I think that is the chat. It's an obvious statement, but I think not obvious enough that people don't stop and think about it. But that is the complexity when we bring that into a controlled environment. Is how do you replicate that? And that's where we kind of link back to choice for me. Is size and choice of your friends in that front. That actually, the more complexity you can give, that you kind of get away with a little bit more than if you restrict that. Then your boundaries from error are much.
You hope that they choose the right thing. We said earlier, with a big thing I've learned with the Salvador over here is it's raining and cold out there now. But I bet if we go and look in most of the enclosures, they're out in it. They're not. They've got the option to go away, but they're out sitting in it, which is bizarre. And you said you found.
We see the same
sort of stuff, which is really strange. Some of the other field work, you guys do at the zoo. You've done the really interesting meal. You telling me about the Rocky Island turtles.
So I've been really fortunate to go to quite a few programs, but the Roti Island St. turtles are a really interesting project. Species extinct in the wild that has been brought back as part of a partnership. A really fascinating program that's now seen animals brought back to Kupang. All that facility work being done there. And again, there are captive bred individuals from America, and from the Bronx, from other organizations, but actually the main driver in that has been all about capacity building. So that regional, that knowledge has been built in range now, and they're actually breeding their own animals.
So that is actually one where they're breeding them. You breed them at the zoo as well?
We do breed at Singapore as well, but primarily the animals have come out of the American population. So population that will be reintroduced. And other contributors as well. So Europe and America both have breeding programs for them and for organizations. Those animals have gone back to Kupang area where there is a set dedicated facility, and they are breeding those animals now, and those bred animals are the ones
that are going back.
So a really nice cycle, and that capacity is there now. That infrastructure cycle is there to support that work way beyond the time and commitment that we're in. So still at very early stages, conservation success takes a long time.
Yeah,
to get these animals back
it's
out.
quite rare for stuff to be bred in captivity and be released still, isn't it?
You see some bits. There's a few examples, but what I think you see more of now is this kind of bridging the gap where they go to these
in situ or in range.
That makes way more sense from a biosecurity point of view, from that, but also from a capacity point of view, and then from there, you can build up. So, but really fascinating project. So if anyone wants to read into it, then please do take the time to learn. There's lots of great conservation optimism. I think sometimes when we talk about all this stuff, we can be quite down. The world can be quite a depressing place, especially from a conservation perspective. So I think it's great, especially in our taxonomy group. We talk all the time about, the impact, the negative impacts things are having, but very few times do we talk about the conservation success stories, and they're out there. Even with things like Bermuda snails that some organizations are working with, right through to roties, there's some really great stories on everything from butterflies. So again, just make sure that connection comes, because there's a lot of great work being done, so people should have a look.
I think you were saying earlier, Luke, I don't know how much you agree with this, that people don't really need to collect those turtles anymore from Rotty because they have bred them in captivity. Do you think that is, in a way, conservation? It's not proper conservation. I have this argument a lot with people. What I'm trying to do here, they're saying, well, none of your true monitors are ever going to go back into the wild. But if you can stop people wanting to get from the wild by having the captive population, is that in a sense conservation? I know zoos see it a little bit different sometimes.
I feel like it's a long conversation to give an answer to, but I feel like if you're not careful, demand can cause as many issues as meeting the demand, and that depends where it comes, because we spoke earlier about when you start looking into ethics, then that it would cost people more to be ethical and do it the right way, and that investment in time and stuff. So if you're not careful, you create a demand and you create a cheaper alternative to the demand, which can be catching them from wild. So if you're not careful, the cause can outdo. Like in an holistic view, yes, if you can provide it. If everyone remained ethical and said, well, I'm only going to buy from that source, if it costs me double the money, doesn't matter, because that's what I'm going to do. So I think it's a balance. I think you can kind of see both sides of it, but I don't think it's a clear cut yes or no. That's not me on the fence. I think that there's two sides to it. If you're not careful,
you're not actually conserving them in the wild. We're just taking away the demand, I suppose, from the pet side of things. That gets slammed a lot more than a lot of other issues like deforestation and stuff. In everyone. Maybe this is me being biased, but like the blue tree monarchs, for example, everyone's blaming everything on the pet trade taking them from the wild, but they're not seeing the other side of things that are deforestation and stuff like that. There's probably a bigger and a more all-encompassing. I mean, Botanta could be leveled in a week if they wanted to. If they want to start chopping all the trees down.
I think there's drivers. I think people latch on because and again, I think it comes down to communication and that conversation we heard earlier about accountability. That there are examples. I come from someone who's kept rabbit, but there are examples of species that have been hunted. That a locality or information is given out. And they are over harvested, over collected. And I think that becomes the main concern. So to me, again, it's just about conversations. I think there's people that do things the right way, and then I think that there's been incidences and examples where that hasn't been the case. And then those stick more necessarily, the negatives stick more necessarily than any of the positive work being done. But again, I think as we continue to evolve these gaps, you're seeing it already in Europe with these conservation alliances that have started, with these organizations that are starting to bridge the gap. I don't mean organizations as in the zoo, I mean these conservation organizations set up now with fire salamanders of others to bring everybody together to use all these different skill sets, these different resources to come together to make effective conservation action. And I think you'll see more of that when it comes to this sort of stuff. So when it comes to species breeding, will any animals from here ever go back to the wild? Well, who knows the answer to that question? But undoubtedly, the collective information, maybe even the species in time, who knows with how quick it's changing. But I think, is it a simple fix that one cancels the other? I don't know if it does. I don't know if it affects.
It's just always that argument of I know it's not proper conservation, but there's been a lot of species in the trade now that aren't collected from the wild anymore because they are being successfully bred in captivity, like the crested geckos and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's not people going to smuggle them out of New Caledonia very often anymore. Bearded dragons, for example, nobody's smuggling bearded dragons out of Australia anymore. And that's probably because the private sector's been so successful with them. So although it's not conserving them in the wild, you're sort of taking away the pressure of that demand by breeding in captivity. That's just my point of it. But a lot of people from the zoo side of things are saying that's not really conservation, which I guess in the word of the conservation it's not, but it's taking one of the drivers away. You're removing that, and then you've got to deal with the other things, deforestation.
I think it's interesting. My stance would be I don't think it's conservation on its own as an action.
No.
But I don't think it's conservation on its own as an action if a zoo breds them. Just on its own.
Yeah.
I think it links back to what I said earlier, that there's got to be more
education approaches. And
we often term it one plan, but there's got to be more holistic look at all elements that come in.
Yeah.
Captive breeding, the trade, demand, supplies might be one element. That can factor
that's what I mean.
But truthfully, breeding them just in captivity, having them as pets isn't conservation of them. But one implication of stopping demand is that the wild populations have less pressure.
You've taken that one pressure of wild.
Exactly. But there's a huge danger risk at the beginning of that cycle. Like adapters, some of the species that population's got to be able to sustain that. You look at roties, they couldn't. They couldn't sustain the pressure that came. So again, I don't think there's a one shoe fits all. I don't think anybody's right or wrong necessarily. I think every case study, every species has a different conversation about what the right attitude. Crocodiles are a fascinating one. Farming practically saved some of this. Well, not practically. It did. So I think there's not a one shoe fits all. I think it's an interesting conversation. And no one party's right or wrong. You could probably pick an example where you feel it's worked as you had, and then I'm sure we could agree on examples where there's been that. And I think being able to have that honest conversation and say there's good and bad, I think is really key. And I think that would open up the route to discuss more this interconnection of private keeping into conservation. If the private trade was a little less defensive on it at times, and a little bit more willing to just call out bad. I think every industry in the planet's got good and bad. The more we can call out bad, and not overinflate what we do, and that's something that zoos have often been accused of as well. Is that if we don't overinflate importance, if we look at things at a level, then I think we can build from there. So, but exciting. I see a lot of progression in that. In the just the quality and standard of breeding as well is becoming more consistent. There's always been great breeders, always for as long as I've been keeping rats, way before us. You see it in books and stuff, but I think the baseline, the base has come a lot higher for what a lot of people are doing, hopefully across areas.
So do you think they call it like the invisible arc side of things, a bit like you were alluding to earlier? Is that ever a possibility because we're keeping them in zoos, a population? Will we ever be able to repopulate something? No, it's not ever going to work like that. So it's got to be in situ and re-releasing it that way. So, I mean, if everything gets wiped out in the wild, I guess those turtles are a great example. If they were extinct in Roti, they have been actually.
No, I think if you look across species, there's been plenty of species where that's been the case. I think the complexity with our taxa is not really understanding inbreeding, depression, and what effect that can have, as we do in mammals, particularly, and some other species. I think our knowledge of the impact of that is still quite low. I think having controlled populations where we know that genetic lineage and then all the changes in taxonomy is making that a more complex field. And that goes off into other tangents about how much does species conservation matter on a subspecies level, how much does it matter?
It's just
are we looking at like biological niches and people filling that ecological niche in a habitat, and that's enough? And I think, like I say, really interesting conversations to come off it. But
for sure.
A lot more work being looked at it, and a lot more structure and organization coming in the private sector as well in regards to what they're doing, which is also exciting. There's some really good people keeping great breeding programs, records, much more transparent.
It goes back to your point, especially with the zoo side of things, of maybe just getting people interested and seeing them in a zoo makes them care about them in the wild. I think
they play very different roles. If you're keeping them at home, normally you're already in the percentile of people that
are interested
are doing that. And you're, also, what this is often, like, good zoos, education is a key part of it. And I don't mean education in how to keep, like, these conversations aren't really for the average visitor. But when we talk about really influencing behavior change, influencing cultural differences, fears, levels, and that's a powerful role that we all play, you know. For a lot of people, snakes, for instance, in most cultures, most literature are demonized, and actually being able to bring people close to them. And I think that's often an underrated appreciation for zoos. Like, I probably wouldn't do what I do now if it wasn't for seeing animals in zoos when I was growing up. They inspired me. And for a lot of people, you know, a lot of people, that's the only way they've seen a Komodo dragon, or they certainly saw one there first. So everyone's got different roles to play. You know, I think the big difference for us is we have to appeal to an audience that isn't always interested. And try to get those messages across.
That is the good job.
You know, even if we can't inspire someone to like them, can we encourage behavior change to not try to kill snakes, to not try to harvest animals? And that can be very difficult depending where you are as well. You know, a lot of zoos aren't positioned in the regions where these activities go on. And that can make it really difficult as well. You know, if you're in a UK zoo, you can educate about rhino horns, you can educate about but a lot of the visitors to the zoo coming to the zoo aren't people collecting.
Exactly.
So that doesn't always stop that, but education does matter. Market, people being educated, and you see a big shift in that. So exciting role from that perspective.
Right, Steve, got anything to say?
Come on.
Steve. I'm just kind of listening in.
That's
what's going on. But obviously, giving people the opportunity to be exposed to the animals. That in human care, be it in zoos, just so that they can sort of appreciate what they are, hopefully sort of build up an understanding, and sort of, I suppose, gives the opportunity to have a passion for them as well, and gets them into the general sort of animal keeping mindset, what we're doing, why we're doing things. And it does kind of just trying to build up the credibility of everyone, be it zoo community or private community. In an ideal world of us all having the same ultimate goal, we're all passionate about the animals that we're keeping.
It's refreshing to speak to both of you guys from Singapore Zoo. So I've tried to speak to people back in the UK with doing projects and stuff, and it was just cut off for whatever reason, whether it's just too hard for a zoo to work with a private individual, or whatever the mean is, or the elitist thing on both sides sometimes. To private people can be just as bad to not work with the zoo. I've been, you know, guilty of it before. It's like, well, now you want my help, but before, when it was the other way around, it's that tit for tat thing. So it's nice to speak to two zookeepers that are, you know, think it's on the same level for sure.
And where do you think? So you come from the private sector, primarily in the UK, I assume. Flipping it back on you, what's your assessment of the private keep? I think the private keeping industry, I don't know whether it gets more attention now, or just social media makes it feel like it does. But there seems to be this constant underlying threat, current changes coming to the hobby, to the keeping. Like, do you feel like there's good changes mixed in with that? And do you feel like the private sector does itself any favours in the UK? Do you think there's room for growth?
I think it's got really bad on both sides. I think when I was doing it, like my first snake was in 1998, albeit I was only sort of young there. So the real sort of keeping years for me would be the early 2000s. But even then, it was like almost an underground thing, and people still thought it was weird that you had a snake. So it wasn't getting looked at as much as I think it is now, because now everyone's doing it. And these governments and stuff are seeing it as more of an issue, because there's more people doing it. There's more people doing stupid things. The venom, I don't even want to get into the venomous side of the hobby now, but it disgusts me pretty much with what people are posting on YouTube. You know, me and you, Luke, have had the same sort of training by the sounds of it, of having the respect and the protocol for these animals. And I see someone trying to kiss a cobra for likes on bloody YouTube, and it's just like, oh, you know, I wouldn't. It was so hard for me to get someone to train me properly in venomous snakes in the first place, having that respect. And now I see, because it's become so easy, or whatever, it's so available now, people are just doing stupid stuff.
So I have an interesting question for you, because we're both passionate about keeping reptiles. All of us, not just us. Steve as well, of course. But I have a question. I won't use the name because I haven't asked to, but a friend of ours, a mutual one that we spoke about earlier, actually, meeting recently, told me a piece of statement once that he wonders if the rule wasn't like keep any species you wanted, work with them. But the one rule was you couldn't tell anybody you keep it.
Yeah.
How many people would still keep?
Yeah, I mean that's the issue, isn't it?
I think that's a fascinating standpoint to look at it from. Like, if you can tell anyone you were here in the market you wrote, would you still be here?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, obviously.
Like, how many people in that? And not so much Zeus, because I guess it's different in an essence, but same logic. Like, if you couldn't share what we do, do you think social media has been a driver for the increase in the trade in the pop? Or do you think it's the right reason that we're seeing growth? Like, we can do it better, so more people are encouraged to do it? Or do you think social platforms have driven that? I don't mean good or bad.
No. It's if I can list you like 10 keepers off the top of my head that nobody probably knows about that do amazing work with reptiles, and they're from that generation that would never post about stuff. Maybe because they were scared about this sort of stuff now, where they're getting the legislation come in. And I think they've always been battling in it, but it was such a small minority of people keeping the stuff that it wasn't to the forefront of these governments that we're seeing in Europe and stuff now. And I think because so many people are doing it, and because everything's so visual now with social media, that people are looking at, and the anti side of things has always been there, but now they've got a video they can pull up and go, well, look at this idiot, and look at this person. The amount of snakes that are getting let out in the UK and stuff now you see, and that wasn't really there before because less people were doing it.
So how do you think you combat that? Because
I think we're lost. I mean, I think the social media side of it, this influencer thing, like I was such an introvert as a reptile keeper, and a lot of us were as reptile keepers. It's been like quite a challenge to stay relevant now. You have to post on social media almost, but from the private sector, if you're not posting on social media, you're not selling anything.
But is it your business, you mean, in that sense? So to like drive business, you have to be able to.
You have to now,
rather than staying relevant as a keeper, or is that, or both in your opinion?
In everything. I mean, it goes back to publishing stuff. I'd much rather publish a paper on the work I did here than write a post on social media, just because I think that's more useful to someone from whatever setting, from a zoo setting or a private sector in 20 years. Oh, Chris bred Salvadori, the follicle size was this. And that's it. Just because I've used that as a reference for so many years, I look at papers that were done in, the 80s and 90s that are so useful for me. But from the business part of the business side of it, people want to see that. If you're not a face, if you're not doing these podcasts and stuff in the private sector, there's so many other people that are. I don't know if it's they're more trusted or what it is. I think people now want the both. They want to go, oh, I bought off Prestasi, for example. They've got this cool Instagram page, rather than someone else that might be doing the same work that's very quiet. It's almost like networking. It's just.
And do you think enough positive stuff gets put out? Like, I'm quite fortunate, I guess, because one thing I think zoos do well can be communication. So we're good at talking about what we do well. In essence, and I think that's a strength. It builds trust and things. Do you think that the industry, the trade, does enough to talk about what it does well?
I think we're getting a lot better.
Like you said, good influence channels out there. I don't follow many, so
I
like Instagram because I enjoy the pictures, but I can't say that I'm as connected as yourself.
I mean, the podcast side of everything is amazing. I mean, I think podcasts have replaced books now, so people I think will go back in generations and listen to a podcast on a specific.
I apologise for the last hour. Anyone listening in a few years' time,
which annoys me a little bit because I'm an old school book guy. But if this is the medium now, I think it's good to put these good podcasts out. There are definitely bad podcasts with bad information, with the wrong people talking about stuff, but also there were bad books written by bad authors that shouldn't have been written that book, and and that's where that folklore and stuff comes in as well. I just think it's a bit scary for the private sector for sure, with the amount of irresponsible stuff that gets posted. But that's across all social media. A night out in Liverpool or Manchester now gets posted on a Friday night, and there's people getting too drunk. That's now for everyone to see, where before it would just be in that village or that town or whatever. The venomous side really worries me, with the free angling and stuff that happens with there, and people getting bit quite regularly now. Maybe not in the UK, but maybe in the States and stuff. I can just see that as just that's where they're going to start, and they're just going to make it harder and harder. It's easy for everyone just to ban venomous reptiles because it's, you know, almost trying to explain that to a lay person of why you want to keep a black mamba in your house in a vivarium is quite a hard conversation to have. But there are people that deserve in the private sector to do that because they do it so well. So why should you have that right taken away from you? We've got the Dangerous Wild Animals Act in the UK, which I think is amazing. But what would it take for them just to be like, right, no more dangerous wild animals, because too many people have been bitten by posting stupid YouTube videos just to get likes or just to get views. So it's a tricky one now. I think the professional side of it is lacking a little bit in some of the social media side, but I don't know what the percentage is.
And how have you found the transition? It might be interesting, I guess, the closer I compare it to is shops, but how did you find the transition as a hobbyist and now doing it as work? Have you found that that's killed any of the passion? Have you found it's changed it?
Yeah, I had a shop before. So the start of my hobby was all in shops. So I worked in a shop from the age of 13 as like a Saturday person, then opened my own shop. And my passion for the hobby went to the absolute floor. Doing that, just dealing with people, giving them all this good information. And then they'll just go for the cheapest option oftentimes, tell them not to buy this or that. They go to another shop, come back and want to buy the animal. I'm like, well, you didn't buy this. Just constant arguing with customers on that side of things drove me to not enjoy the hobby anymore. And then I said I just wanted to be a breeder. If I can just breed the animals and not deal with the customers so much. I'm in a unique position now because I don't have to deal with the end user anymore, which is good for me. But yeah, I mean, it's all a new challenge at the moment. Ask me in 20 years when I'm still here, if I'm still enjoying it. I don't know. I think I'm a reptile person, as you guys probably. I don't think it ever goes.
No, I don't think it goes, but I just think I can say when I moved professional, I think you found it transition is a different feeling when it's work. You know, when it's tied to your income, when it's tied to the pressures of the shop, but it changes the dynamic a little, you know.
I think the dynamic changes, as you both know, is moving to a different country as well. There's a whole new aspect of that, which is brand new and exciting, learning a different culture. And so if you're not so bothered about the money side of it, if I was in England having to pay all those bills and stuff, then I think the pressure's on a lot more.
And I have a question that may not appeal to everyone, but I'm fascinated because I've never done it. But how did you find the balance with your ethics? Because you're clearly an ethical person. You've chatted a lot between that and the pressures of the business. Maybe not so much here, like you say, but certainly in the shop, because I've seen it done well. You know, I know got like Snakes and Hands in the UK. I know Chaz from that. He's got to be the first person that I ever saw turn down selling something to someone. And to me, that changed my way of thinking when I was younger, because it's like, an owner and shop just told you no. And to me, that's the first time someone turned down money and was like, I don't care, like, I don't believe this. And never in a judgmental way, just that if you're not meeting the requirements this needs, until I'm convinced you can. And to me, that filled me with hope. But
I think that's the only way to do it, really. But that's why my business got liquidated in 2014. Because it's a very difficult line to tread. And yeah, it's super. I mean, Chaz is doing really good. Some of the ideas that Chaz has got now, I wish I had back then with getting the kids to do, you know, the record keeping on stuff, to become proper reptile keepers. I think it was. I think there's like a generational thing now of like I read books before I even thought about getting a new species, and doing that side. The actual reptile keeping side of it is more enjoyable. Now it's so easy for someone just to go and buy pretty much whatever they want. If they've got the money and this thing of buying it and getting rid of it and that sort of thing, it's tricky, isn't it? I'd like more real reptile keepers, if that's the right way of putting it.
I've never had to do it. I find that side of it very interesting. I've been a consumer. I've had reptiles, but never been at that end. That decision.
The shop side of it is
tough.
Is the absolute worst. The shop side of it will kill your passion. I mean, Chaz has been going for a long time, but so many shops open and shut.
No, but I think also, again, important shout out. Like, I think the good ones make such an impact as well. I can speak quite openly. There's individuals. Chaz is a great one. I would not be where I am and who I am if it wasn't for individuals like him. The time spent with me when I was younger, the stupid questions, the open door policy. And I know a lot of people that say the same about their own shops. I'm sure you had it. Customers you keep in touch with.
I got really bad. The amount of I wouldn't call them idiot customers. The amount of customers I dealt with made it hard for me to deal with the ones that were probably good. I went and shut myself up in an office and was like, I'm done. pretty much let my staff run it, and I'll be doing, you know, posts on Facebook or whatever.
So you won't be rushing back for another shop?
No. I couldn't think of anything worse now. I mean, fair play to them. I had the whole internet age starting, so I was like trying to compete with prices on the internet were basically the same as my trade price. So people were coming into the shop, I'd be spending an hour with them talking about this, take them over to the bulb, and then go, oh, that's the bulb, that's the brand. They get their phone out and go on whatever it was, whatever Reptile site it is, and be like, well, that's yours is $4.99 and this one's $2.99. So I'm just going to buy it off there. And I'd be like, how are they doing that? And it's because they got no overheads. Yeah. Brick and mortar shop in the UK now must be almost impossible to run. I don't know how they're doing it with the electricity costs and everything. It was hard enough for me to do it with my overheads, but it's like, you're doing it for trade price. I can't do that, but yet I've put all the time and passion that shop online is not going to give you. So that's what killed it completely for me. So yeah, no more shops. Yeah, it's a difficult one, but yeah, bricks and mortar shops in the UK especially is, you know, all power to them. But annoyingly, if we lose all them, a bit like the zoos and stuff, people won't have an avenue to go and speak to reptile people.
I think I'd say, you know, coming from your perspective, what would be your advice to someone coming into the hobby now? What do you think is the roadmap in for someone young and like passionate into it? What would be your roadmap now?
Well, I always say enjoy the learning side of it. I think that's what gets lost. Not the read as much as you can about stuff. You know, if it's a corn snake, read there's some great books on corn snakes, or now probably YouTube videos or podcasts and stuff. Go and get as much information as you possibly can. And it's almost sometimes better. The amount of species I haven't got because I researched the hell out of them. I've got my fix. It's like this dopamine hit, isn't it, of getting a new animal, is often not as fun as actually learning about the new animal. So for me, I used to read books and stuff. I'd be some like obscure salamander I wanted. Something like that. All of a sudden, it would pop into bed. I would see one, maybe in a zoo or something like that. It would pop into bed. Oh, I really want to keep that. Start reading books. Brilliant. And by the time I come to actually buying one, it's like, oh, I don't know if I actually want it anymore. I've learned everything I need to know about it. Keeping it in a box now might not actually be as fun as learning about it. So, yeah, enjoy the reptile. A lot of the research side of it is proper reptile keeping, I think. Instead of just getting it and keeping it in the box, there's a lot of steps before that actually happens, which are the enjoyable steps for me. Maybe I'm just a geek and a nerd about it, but enjoy the reptile keeping side of it rather than just the fix of getting a new animal, because that's a slippery slope that a lot of people fall into, myself included. Right, I've got that one. What's the next one? Yeah, it's a carpet python this week. What's it going to be next week? Because you need that fix of getting a new animal all the time. Where really the fun of it can actually be learning about the animals.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I think from a breeding perspective as well, like quite often people use kind of breeding as the benchmark for, I don't want to say completed, but that's almost what it's like. Done this one now. Yeah. But I think this facility here is really interesting. So how many tree monitors have you bred now?
All 6 of the tree monitors. Numbers I don't know, but all 6 species.
A large number.
Yeah.
And how much do you feel you know?
Nothing.
Yeah. I think that's super exciting.
They throw curveballs all the time.
You could have hatched hundreds and still be learning. I think just goes to show and should encourage people, I think, to longer term commitment to a species that we're one of the weird taxes that seem to assign success to just animals eating and animals breeding, but they're two pretty basic functions.
Yeah, they should be doing it. Really.
That's a pretty low benchmark when we talk about welfare. And the difference between optimal care and being alive. I think if we can move in that spectrum, if you look across most even the commonly bred animals, how many compare to their wild counterparts who can take a young hatchling monitor and turn it into a healthy adult? Yeah, that's hitting those life estimates. It's got the muscle tone. There's still so much to learn. I think it's pretty.
Oh yeah, amazing. And I'm lucky here now. A bit like you were saying earlier, how much do I know about it? When I was back in the UK, I thought I knew a lot. It's like that Dunning-Kruger effect, because I was doing really successful with the 8 monitors I had there. Now I've got 200 of them. Well, I haven't got 200 of them going as well as I had those 8 at home. But that is the challenge, and my dream is to get everything our breeding stock as good as it can be, really. Whether it's production wise, health wise, or something like that. But yeah, that's what keeps it fun. If it was just easy and doing it, then I think it would be pretty boring pretty quickly.
What do you reckon about encouraging people? You've both been to the field a lot, but what do you think about encouraging people to go and see natural habitats? I always think it's something that I don't think enough people do.
Yeah,
especially with how connected we are now with travel options and availability.
Yeah, it's so easy now.
I think there's so much that you can take away from even just seeing a habitat. You know, even if you don't see the species you want. Like, I don't know what you found.
Nah, definitely. So again, I've been quite fortunate over the years as well with sort of trips, be it with university or just trips that I've done by myself, going into the field to be able to sort of experience what it's like. So actually feeling what it's like in a tropical rainforest, the humidity levels, and sort of dealing with obviously the weight conditions, but whatever habitat it is, and trying to find the species in that habitat, seeing where they're actually positioning themselves in there as well. So ultimately, they need to find dry areas, they need to find wet areas, depending on what they're wanting to do at different points of the year, different parts of the sort of breeding cycles, and just their day-to-day sort of lifestyles. So getting an understanding or gaining that understanding of the complexity of the environment that the animal's living in to try and replicate it as best you possibly can. But again, obviously from a sort of an encouragement point of view, sort of to try and get people into the hobby as well, if you're genuinely interested sort of in reptiles. Obviously, I had some really good reptile shops when I was growing up, and I used to go in and speak to some really passionate sort of individuals, and then sort of trying to volunteer in animal parks, be it Butterfly Farm for me when I was right at the very, very early stages, just again to be surrounded by people that are equally as passionate as you, and to try and you're basically like a sponge. You're trying to absorb as much information from them as possible, but at the same time, trying to learn sort of additional information. Obviously, reading books was one of the things I used to do a lot as well. So I've still got a huge book collection back in the UK, and it's something that I'll always kind of refer back to as and when I need to. But again, it's trying to sort of enable opportunities for people that really want to sort of gain that sort of insight into a better understanding. Kind of take advantage of opportunities that kind of come your way as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. The field stuff is super important. I think if you're really interested in keeping whatever species it is, but as soon as you go to the wild, is you get like a rejuvenance or a repassion for that animal.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It becomes amazing. You can feel what it's like, and you know, something you've dreamed of, you've kept in a box for 10 years. You go and see. I mean, it's hard to explain unless you've done it. As you well know, guys. But it's another level. I think I put it off for a long time because I was so busy with the shop and everything. Then first, it's all I wanted to do. My reptile collection actually went down to pretty much zero because all I wanted to do was go look from in the wild. So it's like another aspect of it completely. And now it's sort of rejoined back together with having that field experience and then having, you know, the captive side of it as well.
And how have you bridged that? What would be like some examples of takeaways you've had that you've implemented into your husbandry based on going to the field that you might have changed from your original practices?
That's always a really tricky one because it's so hard to replicate what happens in the wild in a box. Outside, it's a bit easier, and when you're on a larger scale, just with you know, just the amount of stuff you can put in there, branches and stuff like that. It's I don't know. People always ask me that question. It's like, oh, you've been to the wild, so what's it like? I don't. You just get like a feel for it, almost like you put your head in the cage or you put your hand in the cage, or just the way it is, and it's, you know, it's like, yeah, that's similar to what I sort of felt over there. It's tricky, Luke. If you don't spend enough time in the field, I get like a snapshot. I've done 5 trips to like the Tanta now, for example, but I haven't been there every single month of the year. So how do you take that sometimes? And
but did you feel a change between your mentality towards keeping blue tree monitors before your visit and what you feel now, in the sense, I don't mean like emotionally, I mean like do you see the complexity of exhibits, things more?
Yeah, I just think
more important than you did prior to a visit, or did it not change anything much? You were already there.
It's a difficult question. You just get like more respect for the animal on that sort of side of things. But as for keeping, I think it's so far apart almost. You can't provide a jump like I see him jumping 100 foot up in a tree from tree to tree, like we were saying earlier. It's like you can't represent that in the box. I mean, the amazing thing is how successful we actually are in captivity compared to how complex it is in the wild, and how well we must be doing in some aspects from just staying alive. I don't know. What do you think about it? Anything you've been able to take from the wild?
I think I agree with you in the sense that it's complex.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the intricacies that we pick up, that you pay more attention to detail.
Yeah.
I think just the complexity of, Steve touched on it earlier, but from everything, I think lighting and heating is a really interesting one, that it's not single, it's quite a spectrum that you have to give them, and the importance of that. So just sometimes we don't see the necessary benefit to UV for some species. Snakes being a really great example. You can't tell me that an African python doesn't get some benefit from being out in sunlight, whether it's kind of riven, whether there's something going on. But yeah, I think my main takeaway is always just how little we still know. How much we still don't understand about how these animals interact with their environment. I always think egg laying is a really interesting one.
Yeah.
Like if you strip a lot of species down and just give them a singular choice, they use it.
Yeah.
But if you give them choice, it's damn near impossible to get them to lay where you want.
It's
a really fascinating industry that we still know so little about, is what these triggers and cues are. Some of these more cryptic species especially. And I think that's what inspires me, is just how little we still.
I think the biggest takeaway, if you reverse it, was like when I went to Australia, for example, that's like the first real herping I'd done, is that I went to the habitat and I thought in my head, this is where this should be. Instead of doing it the other way of bringing the stuff from captives, I had in my head, right, that rock pile over there should have ackies in it, or that should have, and then finding it, that was a big thing for me on that side of things. But trying to bring it back into captivity, it's very hard to do stuff in a box. I mean, apart from provide all the choices, which is what
I think you touched on some earlier. Like, people see, desert species and they don't get full sun, but like you say, they're not under full sun. So
no.
I think just even understanding, because online now gives easy access to data, but that data has to be understood about how that actually fits. Climate data is useful, but it's not microhabitat level. No. I think sometimes we see errors there because people aren't understanding what they're reading and having that ground behind it.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've got to a stage with a lot of the reptile keeping where we've sort of worked out like the optimum range of temperatures, for example, and then going to see stuff like the blue tree monitors, going and taking a reading. Oh, that's pretty much what we do in captivity. But they're obviously getting extremes of either end. But on average, it's 30 degrees ambient in the day. And then I did a lot of UV readings and stuff. It's like, Jesus, that does get really high in UV. And then come and check it there. It's around 3.5 on the Ferguson zone. But it's providing that choice, like you said earlier. It's like they definitely go way outside the optimum ranges we give them. But doing that in a box, you're going to cook it. If you give it 40 degrees for 2 days, which they definitely get in the wild, and then being able to get away with it, you just cook it. And then the same for the UV. I think it just comes back to providing all them options and just being a bit sensible about it, maybe. Let's finish on your iguana stuff, Luke, unless Steve, you have anything else to say, because me and Luke have been hijacking the whole conversation.
With the iguanas.
Your iguanas, obviously you've done lots of stuff with the iguanas.
Yes, before I came here, I was fortunate to be the program manager for Blue Iguana Conservation, which is based in the Cayman Islands in the Caribbean. So Cyclorhiza, the blue iguana, is one of the world's rarest. It went down to just 25 individuals left. Wow. And captive breeding was what turned that species around. Done on Grand Cayman itself, but definitely helped it, influenced by both private keeper knowledge and zoo knowledge. That species gone round, and over 1,000 iguanas have been released back into the wild now. But it's a fascinating program. Again, a plug, but I would encourage anyone to go and look at it. If you don't follow it on social media, go to Blue Iguana Conservation and check it out. The team there do phenomenal work. I'm super proud to have been a part of it just for a small glimpse, but it's just a great story of conservation optimism, but also complexity. You know, that program has gone on 30 plus years, and there's still a long way to go before we can say that that species is saved,
right,
and that species is stable. And it's a really good example that a lot of conservation is a lifelong commitment. We go on about conservation projects as if you take a bunch of animals, you put them out, and you're done. Well done. There's very few species where that would ever be the case. These animals will always be conservation dependent. They'll always need humans looking out for them. They'll always need us to manage and act in ways that are sustainable. But it's a great program. Go and have a look at it. It was fascinating for me to be able to be involved in that aspect, and it's a really fantastic feeling. I feel very privileged to have got to hatch and breed animals and then be able to release them.
That's
that's a really nice cycle that even in my career, being in organizations doing work, we don't get to do very often. In a career, you can count on one hand. So, but no, do check it out. Do go look at them. And if you're ever in Cayman Islands, you can visit. Any iguana enthusiasts, I recommend it. I'm biased, but they're one of the coolest species on the planet. So go and check them out. Seeing Cyclora living out in their natural habitat is phenomenal. Amazing. You see how well adapted they are to their habitat. The size of them, the muscle structure, it really changes your concept of keeping them under human care. And I think that everybody should, do it once in life.
What was the pressure for them going down to those low numbers?
Yeah, so there's a number of drivers. There's potential disease risks that can go there. Helicobacter, there's pressure from invasive species. So one of the big drivers behind the declining numbers is cats. Feral cats. Yes. They predate on the young hatchling iguanas. Habitat loss is one, though the island's small anyway, so that definitely is an impact, but maybe not as direct as those. And then on some of the other islands, there's been things like our activities as humans. So certainly vehicles, road collisions are a big driver, not so much for the blue iguana, but the sister island rock iguanas at times have been under that pressure. So you'll see a lot of efforts for road campaigns, because the problem is you've got pressures on the younger generation through the feral cats, and then if you're taking out the adult breeders through road traffic, then your pyramid dynamics isn't looking particularly great. So there's a lot, but they're a really story of optimism as well. They were pretty much gone. They're now back in numbers. They can showing through invasive species work on the sister islands and the Caymans that these populations will recover. If supported, if given the infrastructure, they can bounce back of the other iguanas. So a really nice example for anyone looking for a conservation story. Go check it out.
Definitely. They're one of the ones that get hybridized, or were hybridized quite a lot.
So with Nubila, so the Lua's Eye. So a lot of the ones you'll see available in the trade are actually hybrids.
I think I've never seen a real one.
There's very few pure. It's very hard to do without having genetic work. They're almost some animals are distinctly different, but they're almost impossible to tell with the naked eye if they're pure Lua's Eye or they're not. So if anyone has got them, then do look at that. I'm sure animals did go off Cayman before. Since they became critical, there's been no animals leave the island. Historically, they were around, and no doubt they were out there. So, and if people have got hybrids and you're only keeping them for enjoyment, enjoy it. They're magnificent animals.
Always see Lua's Eye cross every time I've ever seen that. I don't think I've ever seen a real one, but I know that's a really good project. I'm going to end it on a pretty simple question. For anyone that's listened to this that wants to get involved in zoo work, what's the best route in?
Again, obviously, from my point of view, sort of kind of volunteering with organisations and joining sort of other reptile sort of study groups.
So taking a step back, say if someone's at school, do they need to do a zoology degree, or do they need to do an animal husbandry degree? Is that or is it not?
It's one of the things that's not essential. If I did go down the academic route, so I ended up with an animal biology degree, wildlife and conservation as a master's. But there's lots of sort of really good enthusiast groups out there. So finding like-minded individuals that you can bounce ideas off of and sort of discuss experiences and sort of see where your interests really lie. And then if there are opportunities to sort of go and visit zoos or other animal collections, if you're able to potentially join a field expedition trip and actually go and see some things in the wild sort of habitat. It's just kind of anything you can do to sort of fulfill that desire that you have, to be able to actually do what you want to do.
And do a lot of zoos have like apprentice programs or volunteer programs?
So there are quite a lot that have volunteering opportunities. Obviously across all the tax within a zoo, within reason. So I was fortunate that I was able to volunteer in a few different sort of places along my sort of career path, and that exposed me to several different species that I wouldn't have had the same opportunity if I hadn't done that. So I think it's good.
It's terrible to go second with this question.
It's the same.
No, I think my advice to people would be to network. And my main tip for this industry, I don't know if it's the same for others because I've only grown up in this industry really, but it's to go out and get stuff you want. You know, I think right now there's never been more information, training, and resources. You know, even when I came into zoos, like you had to put the hours in to get the opportunities. When now online, there's so much training and self-growth and development you can do. But I also think you've got to open doors yourself. That's one fact that's never changed. Like I know I work with lots of projects, both in situ, lots of facilities. There's very few of them I know that would turn down help if it was asked, that would say no to, you know, sharing information, would say no to visits. But those doors don't, the phone, I don't know how many times in your career, the phone don't ring that often with people offering you those opportunities. You've got to go and see. You're going to get rejection sometimes, but whether it's go bother your local reptile shop, whether it's go bother your local zoo, it doesn't mean you get a job straight away, but go speak to the keepers, go keep having those conversations, go use platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, social media, you know, be respectful. Don't take rejection as always a criticism. Sometimes you're going to get told no, but those people worth the salt aren't just going to tell you outright no. They're going to give you a reason why. And don't just take no. Always feel free to keep looking at another route, you know? I think some people have an end goal, a dream job. And when they don't get that for the first one, they're like, well, that's me now. Very few people, there are the odd exception, get that direct route. Sometimes you've got to go. Were you saying you were an electrician once before you were doing this? Like
I did shop and then electrician.
Everyone's got their own path. So my advice and encouragement to people is just people get disheartened a little bit too easy. It's a really competitive market to be in this industry and make a living out of it.
Low pay.
It's low pay, and volunteering has almost become kind of like looked down upon. Like free labor, why should I do it? But the truth is, I understand that. It opens doors, but I also don't know anybody who doesn't volunteer. I get paid for my job most of the time, but if I add all the hours I add in that I don't get paid for, I volunteer as well. I'm sure you're exactly the same.
I volunteered as a Saturday job for God knows how many years in a shop. You know what I mean? In a shop, and look where I am now.
So
if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be here now.
Pressures are different and cost of living, and nothing's easy out there. But if you want it as a career, I think that would be my advice: is just stay stubborn with it and just network. It's never been easier to do it. And I think sometimes people don't, they wait for that post that says, want to come here, click. That post doesn't always come, you know, reach out, don't be afraid to ask, don't be afraid to attend meetings.
And the amount of people that are probably going for that one thing. And
webinars, reach out. Like I say, there are some bad eggs, but generally speaking, I don't know many people who don't understand the importance of the next generation coming through and who don't want that as a goal to share. But I just don't think that phone rings. You've got to go out there and have those conversations and map your own path. And sometimes that means giving volunteer hours. Sometimes it means showing up consistently. You know, I think that social media makes people a bit impatient at times. You know, whether it's instant gratification, they want what they want when they want it. And, you know, academically qualified doesn't always correlate to academically capable people that haven't done school are just as valuable. And again, so I wouldn't be put off if you're not a PhD, if you've not got a degree. That opens some doors for sure, but I don't believe there's barriers. If you want to do something, you can find a different route in. But yeah, for sure, if you're not going to go down the academic route, then the practical route might have a longer journey. It might have more volunteering. It really depends to your own niches. I studied whilst working, so I did a bit of a hybrid. just study wasn't for me. I did it alongside work.
Yeah.
So another route in, because academia to a degree is needed in certain aspects of the job you want, but it doesn't have to be the only route. So
no, a lot of the ones that Australia do that I spoke to when I was over there, they were volunteers for a long time, and now they're like head keepers and stuff. So that is that is a route in for sure.
I think my goal would just be research it, know what you're getting yourself into, because I think whether it's what you're doing, whether it's the academia side of things, whether it's zoos, I think there's shops, there's a lot of challenges ahead, and I think to understand them a little bit better before you become trapped, and perspective, priorities, all these things that you've got to keep in this industry that can get lost quite quickly. Working with animals and people is a challenge. So I would encourage people just to do that and to look after themselves as well. I know that sounds really thing, but whether it be in the hobby as you've touched towards, or I see it in zoos, burnout is a real thing for people. When you're working with animals, the pressure that comes with that, I imagine even worse if it's a business. I don't see a lot of people looking after themselves as well, and your mental health is really important without making this into a preaching session. But I think in our industry, it's not talked about enough. Animals take up a lot of time, having these big collections, high pressure,
losses,
losses,
blaming yourself,
politics, and let's be real, it exists in every job, every walk of life, but it's here. And for some reason, we don't talk about it enough. And I encourage people just to keep a bit of perspective, and and then they'll be great. But good luck. We need more people. I think the real thing to aim on is this. This hobby in this industry more than ever needs young, talented herpetologists coming through. Male, female, whatever's going, we'll have you. We need it. There's not enough of it. I worry that a lot of people join the hobby at a young age and leave it. We haven't got always a clear route of the next generation. And so I encourage anybody, that's the best way for us to beat all these challenges is, a lot of the conservation issues we've touched on will not be solved in our lifetime. No. Crack on with the next one.
So they're forever going on. That's a really good point to end it on. Shameless plug, well, not even a shameless plug, because I want people good to go to your zoo, Singapore Zoo. I need to get over there ASAP. Tell people where it is. What's the easiest way of getting there?
You can do it. Come on, you're the into the camera.
Obviously, Singapore Zoo is one of the best zoos in the world.
There we go.
Got one of the biggest reptile collections in the world as well.
So
if you want to come and see a really diverse collection of all animals, really, then the Mandai Wildlife Group is a fantastic place to come and sort of see things being highlighted from all over the world.
And a good part of the world as well.
Exactly.
For all those young people, this is the guide to bother. When you do come, my bother people, please make that Steve. All right.
Excellent.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.